There is, however, in the Marxist tradition, a serious attempt to analyse what happened, and they go back to basically, in the United States, from 1900 onwards through the 1930s, there was a decline in the rate of profit, which was only stabilised in the 1920s by increasing the rate of exploitation of workers, which meant workers could not be produced by the goods, and the capitalists couldn't buy the goods, couldn't have a really massive level of productive investment, and therefore the thing was filled out with various forms of luxury consumption, waste production, and so on and so forth, which came tumbling down in 1929. Again, before the Wall Street crash. Again, it's another misconception. The Wall Street crash started the crisis in the 1930s. This time you have very, very similar analogies. A decline in the rate of profit, a declining level of productive investment, the thing filled out by unproductive investment, by waste, by building on the Canary Wharf, these vast edifices, the enormous cost, absorbing labour, but creating nothing new. That's come tumbling down. I think it's important to understand there are important differences in the 1930s. The first difference is, this time the state has intervened much more massively than in the 1930s. In the 1930s, the Japanese state intervened, the German state intervened, the American state didn't really intervene until the Second World War. And the New Deal there was a degree of intervention in the New Deal, but not on anything like the scale we've seen over the last 5 weeks in terms of the massive move of the state. The reason for this is like a second factor, different factor, which is the level of state expenditure under capitalism in the late 20th and early 21st century is much, much higher than it was in 1928, 1930. I think the expenditure of the federal government of the United States was 2.5% of GNP in 1929. That's not a total picture because much was done by the states, but total state expenditure is about 10% of GNP. Today in the United States it's about 30%, and in Britain it's something like 40%. Therefore the state intervenes. But the second big difference works in the opposite direction, which the scale of capital organisation, the scale of the capitals themselves, the giant firms, is much more massive than in the 1930s. Therefore the cost of propping up the system is much greater. And therefore what they are faced with is an attempt to prop up the system using all the resources of the state when the scale of intervention needed to prop up the system has grown much greater. And that means for me that we are in for a very, very deep series of crises. If you want, I'll use two analogies. The last attempt to do anything like this was Japan, 1992, and now you get, there are all sorts of people into bourgeois economics who go on, if only they'd done this, only done that on a particular occasion. The fundamental question was, the indebtedness and the problems facing the Japanese state were beginning to overwhelm the potentiality, even of the world's second biggest capitalist state, to deal with the question. So they couldn't solve the crisis. They stopped the crisis developing into a slump, but by maintaining stagnation of the Japanese economy right through effectively until the present. The problem the American, in the present situation, it's possible the American state will do that. It's possible they will stop the drop into slump at the scale of 1930s. But it's possible only for the reason of increasing international tensions between states and also crucifying many of the lesser states in the capitalist system. If you like, the United States can afford that, Iceland can't. And if Iceland can't, probably Hungary can't. And Ukraine can't. And Kazakhstan, you can read, if you read the centre section of the Financial Times, you can read the states across the world which are now being hit by the backwash of what's taking place. And that means we're into a period of immense political instability. I think also there'll be instability between the major capitalist states. At the moment, in order to try and hold the whole system together, they're just managing to collaborate with each other. But the United States capitalism has discovered it. It was possibly $100 billion, possibly $200 billion of its $700 billion bailout package went to European banks. That does not make American capitalism very, very happy. Therefore, into a period of immense instability. In terms of Britain, there's no doubt we're in a period of recession. And I think here we have to understand where the recession comes from. The capitalism faced a long-term problem of falling rate of profit. They move it to try and solve it, they didn't consciously solve it, they're getting sucked into the bubble as a way in which individual capitalists saw a way of escaping this, then creates a problem for them. All the paper profits made by the banks over the last 5 or 6 years, or maybe over the last 20 years, actually are paper profits. The banks have, and suddenly that proved to be worthless. In order to keep the banking system going, somehow those paper profits have to be turned into real profits. That is, they have to be cashed in. To cash them in, someone has to pay. Either the industrial capitalists have to pay, which the social shows very little sign of that happening, or the people who actually create value, whose labour creates value, will have to pay. Therefore, the logic of the situation is enormous clampdowns upon people in two ways. One will be recession, the other will be the attempt to hold down wages. I wouldn't rule out, I mean, very few capitalists at the moment think it's possible, I wouldn't rule out hyperinflation as a way in which they try to recuperate their problems in the present situation. We're in for a period of immense instability. Now, face of that, for me it seems pointless to speculate how deep the recession is going to be. I mean, it's not true that all the capitalists are sitting around saying it'd be wonderful to have a recession. A recession means that certain big sections of capital will go by the wall. When they begin to go by the wall, they will lean on the state. The American car industry, if you look at it, Chrysler should be out of business now if you just apply the pure capitalist logic. General Motors is on the verge of bankruptcy. General Motors, Chrysler and Ford have leaned upon the American state and they will get 30 billion to hold up the American car industry. Faced with that, the German car industry lean on the German state to prop up. So it may well be you have this situation where they may prolong their life temporarily, but in terms of increasing all the pressure and all the contradictions. The conclusions which we have to come to is really, this means we're in for a period of intense bitterness in society. The bitterness you can find everywhere. It's very strange in terms of the crisis. I think for most people, until a month ago, the crisis was something which happened up here at the top. It's only in the last 4 weeks that people began to see that it translates into their living standards, their conditions. When that occurs, there will be bitterness everywhere. And it should be said that bitterness does not always move in a progressive direction. If you're being brought up outside the M25, in those parts outside London which are nearly all white in terms of the colour of the working class and population and so forth, it's very easy, by that circumstance. You lose your job, you blame it on the Polish plumber, or you blame it on the Asian family you've just taken over the local post office. It'd be very, very easy in that situation to see a proliferation of right-wing instincts. I mean, again, reading about the crisis in Hungary in the